You're listening to the Ibn Abi Umar podcast. This is your host, Umar Osman. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Really excited about today's episode. We've got a fantastic interview with Sheikh Hasib Noor from Legacy Institute. For those of you not familiar with Sheikh Hasib, he's a graduate from the University of Medina. He's a specialist in Islamic history and seerah. And chances are, if you've gone on any type of a Hajj or Umrah group, the scholars that you went with probably found a way to link up with Sheikh Hasib and have him give you a tour of Masjid al-Nabawi, other holy sites. But he's the man originally from Austin, Texas, and we get into a number of topics, primarily around the theme of faith as a lived experience, Islam as a lived experience, what are different challenges of faith, what our relationship is with it, how we discuss our struggles, a lot of good topics that we get into. So with that, we'll jump into it. But first, a word from our sponsor, which is the book Fiqh of Social Media, which if you have not checked it out, please make sure you pick up a copy. All of the relevant links for Sheikh Hasib's Legacy Institute, the book, all that good stuff is in the show notes. Hope you enjoy the episode. And as always, if you've got feedback, please reach out.
The brand new book, Fiqh of Social Media, Timeless Islamic Principles for Navigating the Digital Age by Umar Osman and with a foreword by Sheikh Abdul Nasser Jangda, is now available to purchase on Amazon. Praised by multiple prolific Islamic speakers and scholars, the book serves as a guide on how to maintain your spiritual integrity online, navigate the ever-changing landscape of social media, applying prophetic etiquettes online, using social media as a tool for spiritual development, and much more. Visit ibnabiomar.com to learn more.
All right, assalamu alaikum everyone. We're joined with my good friend Sheikh Hasib from Legacy Institute. Sheikh Hasib, how's it going?
Assalamu bro. How are you? How you been, man?
Doing good, alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair for joining me on the podcast. We're going to get right into it because we started talking before the recording and we're getting into the good stuff. And I said, let's just start recording. So the topic that we want to tackle is faith, how it's portrayed, what it means to us, the consequences of how we view our relationship with faith. But just to start it out, how do you, it can be a very broad term. Now it's like spirituality and this and that, but how do you define faith, from a Muslim perspective, and what should our relationship with it be?
All right, great. So, first of all, thank you for having me. We have so many of these conversations, man, and every time we say, hey, we should do a podcast. So it comes full circle. Alhamdulillah, we finally got on. One of the beautiful things about, I think, just the natural conversations, and I've known you for 20 years. I think maybe a little bit less than 20 years.
I know that I came down to Austin when I was in college,
right,
for a conference. I think that's where I met you the first time.
Right.
You were selling books.
Yeah, I was volunteering with the Masjid Ibrahim in Austin. They had a really nice book. What's it called? A library. And then I met you there at the conference. We started talking. It's crazy. Yeah. I think I lent you a book. I don't know if I got that back, but anyway, that's a different story.
I get it back too if I have it.
I'm joking. But anyways, okay. This talk about what faith means to us, I think it goes back to, subhanAllah, the convergence and the divergence of religion and faith. And especially in the context that we live in, and we see other faith groups around us or religious groups. And why do I make this separation or distinction here between faith and religion? In the context that I've studied, from our studies in Medina, as well as from a historical perspective, I just started seeing a trend, especially of how we view the concept of faith and the concept of religion. And I really genuinely believe that the term religion in English and how we've been raised with it, especially in the context of America and you can say the Western world in general, I think it's a Eurocentric concept. And when we talk about faith in Islam, the word deen is always mixed between faith and religion. And I think that's an incredibly important point for us to drive home, because in our faith, or what you would term as deen, it's a worldview of how you perceive everything. So every major, minor, political, personal, private, external, internal, from the spiritual to the practical, all of it is encompassed in a worldview. And that's sometimes shocking to a lot of people that I grew up with. And, and I was just having a discussion with them, and it's quite literally almost that conversation with Salman al-Farisi and that man from the Jewish tribe in Medina, where he was like, does the prophet even teach you how to, and then he told him basically a term for the bathroom. And Salman was like, yeah, that's exactly what he does. And he said it back to him. So the term I would say for faith is a comprehensive worldview. And I think for us, when it comes to understanding that, it becomes a juggle, right? Of seeing people of faith, people of religion, and also comparing ourselves to them, which I think you see, of course, comparisons that even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes in the Quran for us to draw parallels and for them to realize that faith is a continuum. We believe there's only one faith in reality God sent to humanity. We don't believe in this idea of plurality and truth, even though, of course, pluralism and living together with people and all that stuff, of course, yeah. I'm talking about the idea of exclusivity of truth. So when a person, when it comes to Islam and growing up in societies in the Western world, or people who even listening now, and the idea of globalization influencing even Muslim or Eastern societies, that's also very real. You come to this crossroads of, okay, so how do I live with this faith in the modern context, but at the same time, we're trying to balance the different nodes of understanding of I think infringed ideas of religion, which is Eurocentric, the idea of the sacred and the secular, the idea of religion is something that's sometimes very it's decontextualized. It's something that it's enforced. It's something that doesn't allow for freedom of thought, and so on and so forth. So these kind of ideals sometimes become pervasive in people's understandings of what faith becomes. And I think when we look at it from a historical ideal, or just the notion of what is deen, you start to see, okay, Muslims' idea of this faith religion is different. There's a very distinct ideal that you don't see in any other religious group. And I'm saying this in a very honest way. And I think when I meet Christians who are, mashallah, yeah, I say mashallah because the sense of religiosity that does exist, they're actually very, especially with some of my friends, again, anecdotally, it made them want to become stronger Christians because they saw that, wait a minute, why aren't we doing that in our quote unquote religion? And then I think that's where I would start, the worldview of how you perceive yourself in light of everything else.
So I think one thing that's interesting is, we know Islam means that you submit to the will of Allah, to what He has revealed. Mm-hmm. And the challenges that I see, and this might set the stage for some of the topics that we want to get into. When I look around the community and the discourse that I see two primary challenges. One is that revelation itself is not taken as the primary authority in our lives, in the sense that this is what the Quran says, this is what the Sunnah says. I have to submit to it and shape my life around it, no matter how difficult it is, because it's not up to me, right? But I think now there's this idea of interpreting what faith means to me and then going to the revelation in order to support the ideals that I have. And that's kind of that second part of it, which is, I think we underestimate significantly how much our environment affects us. And so living, for example, in America, yes, we understand that there's certain ideas and certain things in the culture that our religion doesn't align with, but I think there's a lot of things that, we miss out on. And I think one of those is the idea of compartmentalizing our faith, where I'm Muslim at home, but I'm not Muslim at work. Right. Or that spirituality is something that's only personal, or only in my personal life, or only between me and God. Well, which of course your religion is between you and God, but it's taken in a way of saying I'm only practicing in certain aspects of my life, but not in others.
Right. There's a funny story happened to somebody close to me there, just being in the gym, and there's somebody that comes up to him and basically says, hey, can you help me out? We're doing a competition. And basically it was a young woman, and he wanted to be respectful and say, look, in the most nicest of ways that I can't basically put you on my back and do a push-up competition. Okay, that's what it was. And he says to me, he's like, it was very it was like just being very straightforward. It wasn't very hard for me to tell him, oh, I'm sorry, I'm Muslim. Like, we respect like women like that. I can't touch you. And he was in a very straightforward way. And she's like, oh, I'm Muslim too. And there was a moment where he was immediately he jumped and said, look, I'm not being judgmental at all. I'm saying me personally, I can't do that. And then it actually sparked interest in that young woman and saying, oh, like asking about him. And the guy's like Hafid of Quran. And she was like blown out of her mind. Like, the entire Quran cover to cover. And I think that convergence, yes, it might be the gym. It's a very rudimentary example, but it's a reality of like, look, there's a person just very straightforward of living this is what I want to get to. Having Islam be a lived experience. And when we talk, you said this line, like the dichotomy between work and the masjid, the dichotomy between my home and everything outside. It's those who perceive Islam as a lived experience. In the essence of just, you don't need to shove what they say, your faith, down people's throats. In essence, always like in the sense of proselytizing. That's not what we're saying. But like, for example, just living as a Muslim in light of everyone else. I have a friend who, for example, at work said, Alhamdulillah, mashallah, astaghfirullah, all that, inshallah, so much that his entire coworkers would start saying those things, right? And I'm not necessarily like saying to do that, but I'm just saying it becomes so natural that then faith becomes a natural byproduct of that entire society. There's somebody, me and who basically was in a position where, because of his faith, they were spotlighted to a large number of people. And the fact that they just lived as a Muslim and without a sense, and I don't want to use the word apologizing or being apologetic, but just being a Muslim as a lived experience. When it's time to pray, they're just very open with it. Like, there's talking about water. Hey, I need to get a cup of water. Hey, I need to go pray Asr. Like, to the point that everybody around them trusted them, and it built a sense of, I don't know, an affinity to Islam being part of the fabric of everybody else's realities. Not that these should be necessarily exceptionalized, but at the same time, that lived experience that I think you were talking about, right? And that's what a lot of people, they struggle with. And why do you think that is, man? I want to ask you, like, why do you think that is? Why do you think people struggle genuinely? I mean, you're in the corporate world. You understand how it's sometimes so difficult for you to just maintain a sense of, I guess, an Islamic identity, and these words we've been saying for 20 years, but I want to say the lived why do you think it's difficult for people?
That's a tough question. I think there's an element of, look, there is a very real aspect of just being the minority and not having a lot of representation, right? Like, I remember working in one corporate building, like, 5 stories, a couple of thousand employees. Myself, Omar Kamal, we both worked in that building. We have the same first name, although we spell it differently. We're both brown. We both have beards. We were like the visibly Muslim dudes, and everyone thought that we must be related. And they just were shocked. They're like, but you guys have the same name, like same first name. Do you think everyone with the same first name is related? But it was almost like exotic. Like, wow, there's these 2 guys. They both have beards. They're both brown. They're both named Omar. Like, it was just mind boggling for them. Yeah. But it is difficult in a sense that Muslim is not one of the quote unquote accepted minorities, right? Like, you'll have different employee resource groups at work, for example, and they'll represent all different, you'll have an Asian group, or you'll have an Indian group, or you'll have this group or that group, but you won't have a Muslim one. And I think part of it is there is an effort to keep religion out of the workplace, which I understand. I wouldn't want to work with someone who's constantly proselytizing to me. And I don't go to work with the intent of proselytizing to anyone else, right? I'm going to do my job, do my career, and go home. So there is this element of, I don't need to display my faith. And it does then become uncomfortable when you do have to show it. But I will say that people, again, to your point earlier, like, people do respect it when you're open about it, not when you're aggressive with it. I think there's a difference, right?
Right.
You're aggressive with your faith. That's different versus people asking you like, oh, why aren't you eating? Like, well, it's our month of Ramadan. I'm fasting.
Right.
Just being able to say something like that, or like, oh, I'm taking Thursday and Friday off because it's our religious holiday. You can be open about those things and just share what's going on, and people are respectful of that. But I think part of the hesitancy is it does take a little bit more confidence in yourself and your faith, just
Right.
because it's not common.
100%. I mean, I always think of so many people that they ask me, you know, how do I tell my boss how to, you know, that I pray and etc. And I just tell them the story that it's been like, I think 10 years, man. This story, it was basically an article about, I forgot where, Huffington Post or something. This young woman basically struggling with her faith in New York City, in the height of the, or apex of the fashion industry. And she always felt like she was going to be judged and looked at in a different way, that she felt like herself a struggling Muslim, but she was trying to do better. So she said that she would like freak out every single day trying to pray Asr before Maghrib comes in, because her cubicle would have people keep passing by, and she would have the sense of anxiety of no one seeing her pray, because they'd be like, oh, like they would judge her, and you know how there's always these thoughts that come across their heads. So she said that like it got to the point where that it gave her so much anxiety that she would just rush with 10. She'd be like, oh, there's 20 minutes left. Oh, there's 15 minutes left. There's 10 minutes left. Then she would just go and say, you know what, forget it. Grab the hijab very quickly. And then she said, you know what, I can't do this anymore. So she said, I got the courage and went to my boss. And I'm thinking she's going to start making fun of me. Like, oh my God, pray. Are you serious? Like, pray for what? Or, you know, these kind of thoughts. And she says that I simply asked, hey, do we have like a meeting place for me to just, you know, use 10, 15 minutes a day to just pray real quick? And she said that it was such a like almost like irrelevant thing. The lady was like, oh yeah, of course, gave her the keys. And she said that my entire problem was how I created this wall of you could say,
You create this problem that's not necessarily there.
Exactly,
I ran into this. When I started the job that I'm in now a couple of years ago, my first week, my manager sent me a recurring weekly appointment Friday at 2 p.m. for our team meeting.
Oh, wow.
And I was just like, oh, I was like, I don't think I was gonna have to have this conversation on day one. And
right.
So I talked to him like, hey, this weekly team meeting, I kind of can't make it because, and then I explained the whole Juma situation. He's like, no problem. He's like, we'll just do it another day. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, yeah, and just block that time so we don't schedule something else on you. And I was like, all right. That's so amazing. Now 1 p.m. to 3 p.m., it just shows me it's out of office.
Nice.
And whoever needs to know. Most people don't really care. They really don't.
Exactly. Yeah.
Once you tell them this is why, they're like, all right, fine, do whatever you want.
And I think it's catering too, man. I think we just the element of self-doubt is crazy, because like you said, they create a problem that they think exists that doesn't. This leads up to I think it was the same week. This was like years ago. I read the same article of how many Muslims in the corporate world, especially entry level, they try never to miss out on the networking parties, even if they're like at, unfortunately, like clubs or whatever, like extremely, racy parties or whatever, because they think that they're going to miss out, even though if it's not a corporate event. And there was articles with these Muslims basically would pretend to be drunk. They wouldn't drink, but they would pretend in order to basically overcome the idea that if they don't participate in this quote unquote out of work networking, they're going to miss out on opportunities of, climbing the corporate ladder, or better opportunities, or maybe even networking with other companies, etc. And then finally, like, I think the article ends with the idea of like, none of that actually helped me when I realized that it was just a waste of time. And these things were not necessarily bringing or building corporate infinity.
I was about to say, this is not a really good example of creating a problem that doesn't exist, because 100%. I have never gone to any of those networking things.
Mashallah.
Like, alhamdulillah, it's never been much of an issue.
Right.
I did work with a friend. This is hilarious. Him and two coworkers, they're both women. They went to a training in another state, so they all traveled together. And they went out to eat, and they asked my friend, they're like, hey, we're all gonna order drinks. Do you want anything? He's like, no, I don't drink. And they just looked at us like, you don't drink? And he's like, no. He explained, like, I'm Muslim, I don't drink alcohol. And they both looked at each other and they were like, oh, great, you can be the designated driver. And then they both got drunk.
So that's the funniest thing.
But no, like, and the other part of it is also this, and I think this is bringing it back to our discussion here, is how faith enters that picture of what's the compromise that I'm making. And I think one way of looking at it is my faith is holding me back. right? That my being Muslim is preventing me from being able to network and bond and do the, have these same interests as everybody else.
Right.
And I think there's another perspective, which is any sacrifice that I make for the sake of Allah, Allah will replace it with something better.
Right. I mean,
how do you get someone to, because it's a significant mindset shift, and it doesn't have to do with practicing. Like, you could be praying 5 times a day and still have that hang up.
100%.
Right? Like, you can still feel like, hey, I'm not being part of the team. That means I'm going to get overlooked when promotions come around.
100%.
People aren't going to treat me the same as they treat everyone. Like, there's a lot of anxiety that goes into it because you're there 40 hours a week.
100%.
But how do you get someone to shift their mindset about how they're making that approach?
Look, man, there's something that I had to come to the realization. It was in high school. I'm one of 5 kids in 3,000 person high school. This is Texas. It's each of them are like the size of the universities in some places. So it was obviously there's a lot of difficulty. And then there's one thing that I just came to realization of, and that is, you just have to have a level of trust and integrity of your faith. And I realized that I kind of didn't have enough trust in Allah, right? And that lack of trust kind of builds and it extends to so many other things. The fact that idea of, Allah will take care of everything if you do it the way He just wants us to, staying within the limits of Islam, and there's blessing and barakah in it. And everything that you do that's outside of those limits, you'll see a lack of blessing and barakah to the extent that, they may not be immediate failures. They may be actually successes, but those successes will lead you to unhappy places, discontentment. So people could be very, very successful in worldly standards, but their life eventually becomes to a level of dissatisfaction or discontentment that they didn't actually put in the equation when they were doing things outside of those limits. Go ahead.
Oh, so let me throw something at you.
Yeah.
So let's say someone does take this approach. Okay,
Mhm.
I'm going to sacrifice for the sake of Allah. I'm not going to attend these networking events. I'm not going to partake in these after work activities, so on and so on and so on.
Right.
But hey, I've been sacrificing all those things for 5 years and I haven't gotten a raise. I haven't gotten a promotion.
Right.
Where's all this barakah that you're talking about, right? And it's almost like, how does someone, what are the expectations someone should have from Allah? Like, hey, I'm doing all this. Right. Where's my reward, so to speak?
I understand where a lot of us, when we create faith to be transactional, and that I think is also in essence a problem. And the problem, obviously, hindsight for every single person is 2020. And I did an exercise like we do. So we started this community space institution called Faith, and we have 5 different cities throughout the world: London to San Diego, Austin, Ottawa, Canada, and New York City. And usually what we do in discussing practical spirituality of exactly what we're talking about, how to make faith something as a lived experience, I ask in one of the first sessions, tell me about a moment that you've regretted in your life. Like, seriously regretted. Somebody, for example, would say, one of my friends wanted me to invest in Bitcoin, and we almost they wanted me to buy 2,000 at some cents, and I was like, nah, that's worthless. And now it's at 50,000 now, right? They would be like, anyway. Or somebody would say one of my friends asked me to be on the board of Mac, and before it got big, and I refused it. So these are real opportunities that they didn't take. And I said, opportunities that you didn't take that you feel regret. So then I let the conversation naturally happen. And people start with all kinds of regrets. I regret this job. I regret this, blah, blah, blah. And then subhanAllah, during the course of that conversation, subhanAllah, it's almost like a development of the faith development. There's always somebody that says in the circle, but you know what? If it wasn't for that failure perceived, I wouldn't have ended up doing this, or that. If it wasn't that, if I got onto the board of Mac, I would have never met my husband, who I love dearly, and et cetera, and all this other stuff. If it wasn't for and all of these things start to come together. At the end, when I ask them, I say, okay, can you guys tell me things that, that you regret? At the end, they say, you know what? We don't really regret those things because it brought us to where we are now. And that is, I think, the hurdle that will help come when they're in the lived, quote unquote, failures that they're not seeing, and they're seeing faith as being transactional. Just remember that Allah is preparing your happiness as long as you're fulfilling that essence of his pleasure, his contentment, or that's essence of submission to him. And if you do that, it will help you overcome the immediate, what you could say, lack of success or even failures. And I honestly, it's like Imam al-Ghazali was asked, how do we taste the sweetness of faith? How do you taste this level of, trust in Allah to such an extent that even now I'm asking for my promotions, I'm asking for all of these things, and I'm not seeing it. Why is it not something physically that I can tangibly see? And Imam al-Ghazali was like, well, you're asking me to tell you, describe sweetness or describe love. Some of these things are perceived realities when you actually, taste something sweet and you taste what love is. It's something that when you're in the process of, maybe you can better word it, but in the process of, doing, you will
It's experiential.
find, yeah, it's experiential. That's a perfect word. So if it's an experiential experience, you have to be able to, propel that with your element of trust and knowing that Allah is preparing your happiness in light of the difficulties that you're going through. I mean, that's in essence that's one of the greatest claims Islam makes. And in fact, I was thinking about this earlier. I was like, look, man, there's a rise in suicide, especially now in the COVID pandemic. And there's so many people that are just finding voids in spirituality when they've been detached from human beings and detached from just communicating on a very normal level. So they're finding themselves spiritually empty. Why aren't we talking about having spirituality from a Muslim perspective for non-Muslims? Just talk about spirituality and then tie it back to Tawheed, of course. But the idea of what our faith brings in and filling people's voids is immensely powerful. And if people can channel these kind of concepts, that this is the greatest claim that Islam makes in reality. Do what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and you will find the blessings at the end of the road. And in the process of which Allah even says, it's not about, okay, wait until the end when it's all over, but you will see those successes. You will see, those moments where you will look back and say, man, subhanallah, how things worked out for the better.
How do you frame and define success? Because this is, I know it's a buzzword, and I know that it can mean a lot of different things. But one thing that I notice is, and again, we tend to sometimes take on the culture of where we live. And one of the ideas that's popular in society is the concept of prosperity gospel. And, there's an obvious religious connotation that if you follow God's commandment, you will reap riches in this world. But there's also the entire ideal of just the American dream as well, which is if you work hard and you follow these rules, you will lift yourself up and be successful. And again, success here being measured in, again, terms of your personal advancement or accumulation of wealth and so on. What would be an Islamic definition of success in that regard? Because I think one thing that happens is we do often end up conflating it with some of those same ideals.
The concept of success, actually, if you look at it from the Quranic lens, if you look at the word falah or muflihun and how many times Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions it in the Quran, in reality, everything we've discussed, that led up to this point of understanding success is just living everything we've said in an experiential experience of Islam through your day-to-day life. And that, in essence, is a successful believer, is a successful Muslim in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum, right? The most noble of you in the sight of Allah are those who have the most consciousness of God. And this is the consciousness. So and no matter what happens in your life and you have the initial reactions become surveying your life in accordance to what, is this something that will lead you closer to God? Is this something that is going to help you, come to some sense of reality of your shortcomings? Or is this you could say almost like a cause and effect because of something that you slipped up on? And coming to this kind of space where you understand almost what you could say how Allah functions in this universe. I don't know how to explain it other than in giving an example of Al-Hasan al-Basri. Hasan al-Basri, basically, he was like, when I went home and I found that my ride wasn't riding properly, and I went home and there was these arguments that started for no reason with my wife, He said, I realized it was because of a sin I committed earlier in the day. So the best thing I can say is becoming in tune with that lived experience more and more. And that cause and effect to a lot of people is still in a state of confusion. A lot of people come and ask me like, how do I know that this difficulty that I'm going through is not punishment from God? Well, subhanAllah, I mean, that's the idea. That's the notion that the difficulties that Allah sends are not necessarily punishment. They're actually might be good for you. They might be actually elevation. They might be actually a sense of Allah wants good for you to elevate you through difficulties. And those difficulties you will learn how to overcome. There's all that famous, like line of poetry. I asked God for ease and he gave me difficulty that taught me strength to overcome. I mean, it's the same concept. So success to me and success that we were taught traditionally is to have this level of understanding. And I couldn't call it spiritual equilibrium. I can call it an essence of understanding the lived experience of Islam. So you become more in tune. It's not like as the scholars say, among the primary roots of spiritual diseases called Ghaflah. There's a number of, they call them the 7 deadly sins. We have a number we call 7 deadly spiritual diseases. Plug in. I'm going to be doing a seminar on this later. But anyway, the point being,
we'll have the link in the show notes.
Inshallah. The point being is a sense of ghafla, a sense of heedlessness, where a person is we're not talking about heedless of like salah, heedless. We're talking about heedless of this spiritual state, of this spiritual understanding, of understanding how Allah functions in the universe, and how that universe is just the microcosm of you in your own life, and how those cause and effects actually take place if you understand it. And for me, if you get to that level, then you're successful.
So I think this is really like the part that's difficult to grasp, because when I think in terms of how people talk about their relationship with Allah, they approach any of these topics, there's an undercurrent. I don't know if you've noticed the same thing. Mm-hmm. I've noticed and it's not explicitly stated, but it's kind of hanging out there, which is this idea of I deserve something from Allah. Like I've done XYZ, so I kind of somehow I'm owed this thing. If a non-religious person will say like the universe owes me this.
Right.
We obviously wouldn't be that brazen to say like Allah owes me something, but we kind of sometimes make that point in a roundabout way.
Yeah. As if Allah owes us something because of what we're putting in, like input output kind of thing.
Exactly.
On a personal level, it's easy to just give like obviously the general the general pretext of what we're saying, lived experience, trust in Allah, and then these things happen. But on a spiritual level, honestly, when we lack those elements of, I would say generally actions that have I think loss of meaning. In essence, we're just doing them as a routine. We're expecting an outcome to just come through doing them rather than the meaning behind them. I think that's also an incredibly problematic aspect. Meaning prayer just becomes, I want to pray in order to get this thing I'm searching for. And I'll give you an example. I have a number of people they come and ask me, Sheikh, can you make dua for me? I'm like, what's her name? And then they start laughing, right? And I say to them, I'm gonna make a dua, but you have to be ready for, saying Ameen to it. You got to be prepared to say Ameen. It's not just a normal Ameen. I want you to understand what I'm about to tell you. And they're like, what do you mean? I said, I'm going to make a dua. Oh Allah, grant you the best person for you in this world and the next. That is khair for you in this dunya and the akhirah. And that means the person you're talking to now, if they're not khair for you in your dunya and akhirah, they will be taken away. So the person responds with like a crying emoji, right? And they say Ameen. So the idea and notion is we have to build ourselves up to understanding that every world dunya stimulus that we're going through is preparing ourselves. And if you have that understanding, then you will understand and always ask in your dua, oh Allah, whatever you put in front of me, give me khair and whatever is good for me in this world and the next. And again, that's what I'm saying. If a person doesn't have this element, then they're going to consider faith as transactional. It's like, oh, I'm actually praying to to get this. And if I get that, then that is where I find contentment. Whereas faith teaches us, like, in essence, three levels of sincerity. The first level is when you ask Allah, and this, by the way, Yahya Zakaria al-Ansari, he mentions this. He says these are all forms of sincerity, but look at the levels. The first form of sincerity is when you ask Allah for something, you do something in order for Allah to prevent you from some kind of harm. For example, the Prophet says, if you give charity in secret, it will remove the anger of God, or it will extinguish the anger of God. That's the hadith. صدقة في سرت في غضب الرب. And that's sincerity. He says, he calls this the lower level of sincerity, because why? It's transactional. The second level, he calls it wusla. He says that you do something in order to get a reward out of it. For example, like certain things in Jannah, or even physically, the one who gives, the one who establishes ties of kinship, meaning you keep connected to your family. You give phone calls to your aunts and uncles, and other, of course, close people who are even closer to your parents, and you just keep in touch with them. The Prophet ﷺ says this is a means of extending your life. So a person's intending this reward. And the Prophet, the Sheikh Yahya Zakaria al-Ansari, he says this is also sincerity, but it's still transactional. And the third level, which is you just simply doing it because of the relationship you're creating, in the level of, I guess, spiritual closeness you have with Allah. And that's the answer in hadith of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that which has weakness in it, and but the meaning is true, and many scholars quote it, which is that Allah says that I give more to those who remember me than those, I give more to those who are busied in my remembrance than those who simply ask. Than those who simply ask, meaning those who are busy in the remembrance of Allah, in essence, bettering their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning they're seeking meaningful prayer, meaningful dua, meaningful sujood, and meaningful charity, or meaningful any relationship interaction. They're only seeking the pleasure of Allah, and that's a high level of spirituality to reach. I mean, all of us are trying to get there, right? But during the process of a person doing that, being busied in the remembrance of Allah, also literally, meaning instead of making dua, you're doing istighfar, or you're doing a tasbih or whatever. Allah says that He will obviously take care of that person more, because they're constantly busied in the remembrance of Allah, than the one who's just simply asking. All of this is a long answer to what you asked, and that is, we're trying to reach this level of having a meaningful relationship with God. And I think everyone just needs to get to this level before they start asking about why am I not being given what I've asked for? Rather, you say, why is there a shortcoming in your relationship with your Lord?
So, as you mentioned sincerity, you actually made me think of something else, which is everything that you mentioned is regarding a person's sincerity toward Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, there's I don't know if the term is phenomenon or if it's just part of the culture now, but there is this idea now of authenticity, which is sincerely representing yourself and not putting on a show, not faking it, not trying to be something that you're not, but authentically representing who you are.
Right.
And one part that I've noticed this a lot, and I don't know the right way of talking about it, but it's this idea of, okay, I'm struggling, and I'm going to show the world that struggle as a way of authentically being true to myself. Now, in some cases, that may be publicizing sin.
I was just about to say that.
Yeah. Okay, go for it. Go for it.
No. I want you to finish.
Okay, I'll say in some cases it's something like publicizing sin.
Right.
I think in some case it is quote unquote sincere in the idea of maybe if I share my struggle authentically, it can maybe inspire other people, or I can get support, or what. There could be a multitude of ways, but it's still centered on I want to represent myself a certain way.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great, I think, discussion. The idea of authenticity and representation, right? You mentioned representation earlier. I think it's just incredibly telling. Where are we getting this idea of authenticity and representation from? Where's the source of it? I mean, if you're looking at the source of that kind of thought, is it the fact that we want as Muslims to be authentic to ourselves, or is it that the fact that we're being influenced by people who do the same thing, and we're saying, you know what, I can do as well, and show the fact that we as Muslims also have struggles, and we're not, and I hate this word, to be honest with you, because it's been abused. All three of these words are being abused. And the idea of is where Muslims are not a monolith, right? Muslims are not a monolith. So we have to be authentic to ourselves and the struggles that we're going through so that we can solve those problems. I have issue with it with only one perspective. Number one, we are a hugely diverse population, massively diverse, from race, ethnicity, immigrant to indigenous. All of that is powerful for us to understand and accept I think the authentic backgrounds of Islam from all these different kind of the spectrum of Muslims that exist. That's 100% beautiful, valid. Allah even says that in the Quran, right? In Surah Al-Hujurat. We've created you from different tribes and also from different backgrounds. What lita'arafu, so that you may know one another, draw affinity, and also establish the communities. The whole surah is about establishing community. And I challenge, by the way, anyone to find me a community as more diverse than Muslims, 100%. The problem comes here then when we have, let me just put it in a straightforward way, an Islam that is only specific for this level or this group of people, representative of only this people. I have like the Islam of Umar Usman and the Islam of Hasib and the Islam of Fulan, and my subgroup that kind of works with me, whether it be diaspora, whether it be Black, whether it be anyone. And I have problem with that because in reality, our faith is not compartmentalized in that way. And you can sense that kind of language and narrative is borrowed. You don't see that kind of language in our culture. You don't see, I'm talking about our Islamic culture. You don't see
that. Was very new. It's in the past few years only, I think.
Right. And what happens is there's a lot of, of our tradition that's taken from scholars who either are from a particular part of the world, and then they're sometimes highlighted in the wrong way. For me, I would love to celebrate the fact that something that we learned from the Ottomans. They literally said Islam is the land that Muslims live in. Islam is the land that is under our feet. So you understand that wherever you land, you're part of Muslims and wherever Muslims are. And we celebrate, and we should celebrate, and we should highlight. So some of this reality is the fact that Muslims have had a huge issue with racism in the community, and you have people saying, why are we going to celebrate? For example, we're now in February, which is Black History Month, and people are saying, well, why should Muslims celebrate? This is ridiculous. It doesn't mean that of course, the fact that we're celebrating Muslim Black history is something beautiful and vibrant in our tradition. Let's talk about all the great scholars that happen to be Black. Let's talk about the great impact that Muslims had in America and also the West, starting from Malcolm X and moving on and down, many other people. So we're caught in this discussion, and I'm just amazed that why is it that it has also mixed in this idea that it challenges your authenticity if you don't accept this narrative that there's an Islam only for this subset and Islam only for that subset. I think that's the only thing that I have a problem with personally. But when it comes to this notion of authenticity, of showing yourself in the most absolutely raw way, it goes against many elements of our faith of publicizing sins. This is so everything that's in accordance with the prophetic hadith teaches us that you shouldn't be publicizing your sins. Does this mean that you have to, and this is the problem when we have these kind of discussions sometimes, when everybody's minds start going into exceptions. But what about people who do blatant, sins that harm the community? Shouldn't we be openly talking about that? There's a difference between openly discussing an issue that the community needs to resolve versus a person going and publicizing their own sins to the world in this false notion that I have to be authentic to myself so that I don't pretentiously show a image that I'm not. This is shaitan, literally. There's nothing else to say other than that.
What about people who feel that they need to publicize sins as a way of showing that, hey, we're just like everybody else, right? That idea of acceptance. I don't want to say assimilation because that really projects a lot onto someone, but, just trying to, I would say maybe it's almost an overreaction to the otherization that's been done to Muslims, right? There has been an
Right.
element, especially in America, of Muslims are just this crazy, weird, whatever group of people.
Right.
And I think now to counter to say, hey, we're just like everybody else.
I don't. I find it. I find it just interesting because when we talk about we're like everybody else, we're not. We're not. I almost see it as excusing or justifying the fact that you will find Muslims drinking and Muslims committing zina and Muslims doing whatever. I don't understand why we can't see the fact that it's not about we're like everybody else. We're all just human. Human beings will commit sins. Muslims will not be the perfection of the ideals of Islam that we're all trying to aspire to. And I think rather say that we're all imperfect beings that are trying to aspire to the perfection of Islam, the perfect ideals of this faith that came from God. That's a beautiful statement to make. But the notion of like, let me just, try to present authenticity in a way of justification. Our faith has a clear standard of an ethos, an ethic, a character analysis that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. So it's not just this discussion is not just simply stifling people's authentic, I think, journeys, but I think people just need to really assess themselves of why they're seeking that. And when it comes to our faith, no one is saying, for example, if you were to say, let me just give a rudimentary example. Somebody's had a drug problem in the past, and they're speaking about that in order to uplift people who have had that kind of problem and to help them to alleviate it and to seek help the way they did through their. This is something vastly different from somebody coming and basically openly showing that they're dating, having sex before marriage, drinking, going to clubs, and etc. And then you have this constant battle on social media of Muslims, then, they call them the haram police, projecting the fact that this shouldn't be done on the fact that Muslims struggle, Muslims have all of these issues. And the approach then is with some of these people, the fact that they're so harsh, it creates the counter extreme of justifying, let be the way they are. And I think those two extremes just beget each other's problems. One of them is the fact that the Prophet ﷺ taught us a method and process of helping uplift people in their faith. A person who's struggling with everything we just talked about, Islam as a lived experience and trusting God and getting to the notion of meaningful prayer, and you're sitting there railing at them about something that will cause a greater harm, the scholars say it's actually haram. You're causing a greater harm of them, maybe even leaving Islam, including some big Hollywood names who they were railed on so much, they literally said, I'm no longer Muslim. And people are like, see, we told you, don't ever take these people as role models. It's like, subhanAllah, you guys don't have the mercy of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in your faith. And that's why it's drawing other people away from it. So we're talking about the gradation of how to level people up to a faith from where they are, accepting them in their struggles, but also having the decency of not falling into this idea that I just need to be authentic. So I'm going to be public about my sins. No, you don't need to be public about your sins. That's also against the Prophet ﷺ's injunctions. So have your struggles. Yes, you will. Everyone will. But don't fall into this idea of, I'm going to be authentic to myself. So I'm just going to, just like everybody else, I'm going to publicize everything that I do.
What about the other side of it, which is someone that's not necessarily trying to publicize their sins, but they just take the approach of whatever I do is between me and God, don't tell me anything?
I mean, look, a lot of these things, and you know this, man, is they're very, very straightforward answers from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ when it comes to, number one, a person who feels attacked versus a person who knows what's the truth. And in those kind of conversations, and that's why I always
I think my thing is maybe less about the individuals, right? Because usually it's like you said, they're dealing with like some type of hatred or probably bullying or something like that. But I think the sum effect of some of these discussions or interactions has been that even someone that's not necessarily publicizing their sins, they're just going to take the approach of, hey, you know what? I should rein my faith in, and it's just between me and God, and I'm not going to share anything of it with anyone.
Right. I mean, look, a person, and just like anybody else, has so many internal processes in trying to deal and battle with faith, the struggles that they perceive as real struggles that they're going through, and how it balances between those two things. When a person has something like that, there's a wall, right? We talked about the idea of a person creating a problem that they think exists that there is, it actually doesn't. That comes from a fear of what, lack of success, not getting what they perceive as a roadblock to being a practicing Muslim in the work environment. So what we have to actually do is not really answer to people who make those kind of comments. We have to actually go behind what is the reason behind those comments to begin with. And you'll find that a lot of people had religious trauma. You'll find that a lot of people have had bad experiences that that they use to justify their stances that are wrong to begin with. This doesn't negate and is dismissive of their trauma or experiences. But what we need to do is to actually be prophetic and how to deal with these things. If a person's using those words, especially on social media, I mean, look, how many people are just projecting these things just to have a voice box to have an opinion on? But rather, when you sit down with them and you have like a genuine conversation, you'll find some genuinely strong factors of what made or put them in the place where they are. So I always, when I speak to a person and I find them to be very volatile towards faith, I really almost don't talk about it head on. I really just try to get to know the person and see what made them the way they are. And then, when those, you could say, those walls that they've built in front of and that they're projecting on you, are they broken down when they see you as, somebody they trust, then you can have some of those very real conversations of why it is that they're saying that it's just between me and God. Maybe they're afraid. Maybe they know that they're committing sin and they're just using this as a defense mechanism because they're sick and tired of being attacked. Maybe they've done things in the past. Like, I'll give you an example. There was a story of a young woman and she's like, what can people do to me when I wore hijab after 9/11? Right. And I was just like, you don't understand. Me and you are guys. Like,
Yeah.
you're married, I'm married, so we know the stories, right? Of how our wives are treated and how we look like now, new age, mashallah, like GQ models, because we have beards and all that other stuff. People like amazing beard. I'm like, dude, like, you didn't say that to me 15 years ago.
Yeah.
People would make fun of me. You know that. But the amount of problems that led to her to come to this state, we just got to be empathetic of what is behind these words that are being said. Only God can judge me. My faith is between me and God. Leave me alone. For me, a conversation that has led to that statement being made, I think was problematic to begin with. If it's on social media, that's definitely projection. And we're just not having very authentic, if you use that word, authentic conversations. Like, I know we're in COVID pandemic, so don't get at me with that. But the idea of just talking to people as people who are works in progress, right? And I really wish that people who are listening to this, they stop trying to argue with others to make point, but rather really, really look at how the Prophet Muhammad SAW won people over, and he cared more about winning a heart than proving a point. And in reality, if you look at everything in the seerah, I haven't seen this in my life. I have all the seerah that I've ever read. The Prophet ﷺ caring more about establishing a truth than losing people's hearts, to the point that hypocrites in Medina would spread lies about the Prophet ﷺ's family. I'm going to be very blatant, straightforward for you to understand that his family committed adultery with other people. And they would come to him and say, Ya Rasul, this is slander. This is treason at the highest level. Let's take care of these people. And the Prophet ﷺ said, I never want anyone to say that Muhammad hurts his companions, kills their companions, cuts off his companions. I mean, where is this empathy, dude? Where are we? We're not even that. We're talking about emotional intelligence, and mashallah, your book that just came out, I'm going to plug it. Yeah. Fiqh of social media. But we're missing this level of interaction, prophetic interaction. Where is it? And we're worried more about the arguments and the opinions and the things that are the statements and the expressions that are made.
What's funny is I think some of it and I'm not trying to defend it at all,
Of course.
by any stretch. Anyone that's read my site knows I've written a lot of articles about this too.
Right.
But there is this idea of the role of faith is undermined in society.
Mhm.
And so we somehow need to defend it, right? If I'm giving
Right.
husn adhan to any of these people, it would be that maybe they have this, they're maybe not acting on it the right way, but maybe they have a sincere intention of
Right.
wanting faith to play a more central role in people's lives. Now, the way they go about doing it, yeah, absolutely,
Right.
it's the wrong way, but there is that concept that faith is being undermined constantly,
Right.
whether it's by other Muslims, whether it's by society in general.
Look, behind everything that's done wrong is sometimes a good intention.
Yep.
This is the
Yeah,
same.
the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right?
Right. I believe Mr. Wu said that. But my whole point being is how many people under that guise, that faith is under the attack, go on to say so many things that make people hate them. And Allah says in the Quran, رَبَّنَا لَا تَجْعَلْنَا فِتْنَةً لِلْقَوْمِ الظَّالِمِينَ رَبَّنَا لَا تَجْعَلْنَا فِتْنَةً لِلْقَوْمِ الْكَافِرِينَ. Oh Allah, don't make us a test, a affliction, a means for people to be, in essence, thwarted from faith. Those who commit wrong, oppression, and those who are those who reject faith are not even Muslim to begin with. So for me, I'm not being again dismissive of the fact that yes, this is true. Yes, faith now is in many ways undermined in many different angles. There's a way to have that discussion. There's a way to present that. There's a way to have a discussion with the progressive left, and especially on the idea of morality and that being protected under. I mean, if you're an American in the American Constitution, in the Western world, really, I mean, except France, because God help them, I don't know what's going on there.
Yeah.
But which they're setting a standard of basically fascism, undermining faith, and they're the worst example. Not necessarily among the highest as well. There's Hungary, there's other countries as well. I might get in trouble for any of this, but I don't care. The point being is, if you see that conversation needs to take place, then set the model the conversation in the best way. The fact that we as Muslims cannot have our values attacked. We as Muslims cannot have the standards of what our faith teaches be attacked as being incongruent with being American, quote unquote. Because then what in reality is the difference between the same Trump alt-right ideas that we've been dealing with for the past 4 years, and now you just flipped the coin and made them now alt-left ideals that are in essence, for many people, that push them in that direction. The fact that there's no tolerance of these ideals in the public space, that conversation just needs to be modeled better. That conversation of disagreeable, a disagreeable model of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even in the Meccan society, where he would teach the ideals, even that faith that Islam taught, but he didn't do it in a way where the people, in essence, hated Muslims. They hated Muslims because they didn't want this faith to,
take away their power.
Take away their power. So in essence, they didn't hate the faith because he told them be chaste. He told them that there is no sex outside of religion anymore, outside of faith, in marriage anymore. You don't see that in that society. It was done in such a beautiful way that it was modeled. In essence, I really think, bro, more Muslims need to start speaking to one another and having these conversations where they'll disagree on a number of things. We already know that, but how we model that disagreement isn't to just start cutting people off. I've had some incredibly, painful experiences where I have established relationships with people for the past 7 years, 8 years, and they flip the switch on you because of one disagreement on some external tertiary point of how Muslims should discuss faith, or our faith values in American society. So at that, you get cut off because of it. For the love of God, is this really what our faith teaches us? And that's why it becomes problematic to me. Then who are we modeling after? Are we modeling after the prophetic society? Or are we modeling after the progressive society, or modeling after the alt-rights, or modeling after whoever is out there that's other than what our faith teaches us? Yes, we stand out. Yes, we provide solutions for how to speak about these issues. Our faith teaches us all of this. But Muslims, Allah help us all, we're having difficulty doing that.
What will be the way for, I mean, some of these issues, I think for a lot of people, they feel overwhelming. They're things that you think about, you're like, man, I don't want to get into any of that stuff.
Of course.
What would, and I know we're kind of going long here, but maybe as a final point, what would be your advice to people that are listening? They're just saying like, look, I don't want to get into all this. I do want to prioritize my faith and make it the means by which I live my life. But how do I practically do that while avoiding this minefield of stuff that's happening around me?
I mean, it's difficult, man. you're you're a human being that has to, obviously you're subject to the stimulus of everything happening around you. A lot of people, I mean, people I've talked to, they said as soon as Trump came into office and he left the office, you saw a dynamic shift
Oh,
in
absolutely.
in just the language, in just the attitude. So similarly,
Yeah, so let me maybe rephrase the question, right? So maybe more, how do I keep my faith as a priority and not inadvertently give in to what's happening in the culture around me, right? Because like you said,
Right.
what's happening around you has an effect on you.
100%.
We noticed there's, not to get into politics, but yes, there's a
Right.
difference in how society was from 2016 onward versus before.
100%.
Right? The way that people talk, the way that people interact, the things that are considered normal parts of discourse in the media or in daily conversation, a lot of those things changed completely.
Yeah.
And they do have an effect on our worldview. They affect the way that we view the people around us, right? Like before 2016, if I went to Chick-fil-A and I just saw a random dude wearing a red hat, it didn't mean anything.
Right.
But now I see a guy with a red
Now you
hat
have
with a certain
PTSD.
slogan.
You could
I'm
be wearing a
making
Kansas
certain
City Chiefs
assumptions.
hat, bro.
Making me feel a certain way. You know what I mean? But
Right. I think that everything we spoke about from the beginning, of centering Islam in our lives, will teach us how Islam from the Fatiha, from Surah Al-Fatiha, is compartmentalized, or has three, what I would say is three components. You have, and this is also taught in emotional intelligence, but obviously prophetic emotional intelligence. Number one, your relationship with God, your relationship with people, and your relationship with society. So these are not mutually exclusive. They have to function at the same time. Our faith is not a faith of monks where we all have to go and become spiritually in tune with God and then forget the society around us. It is
we can't turn it on and off in different situations.
Right. It's a social responsibility of Islam. You have to. This is mentioned in the Quran in Surah Yunus. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, in terms of those who said to a group of people, in essence, why are you even bothering to go out and correct others? And the response was, so that our Lord may forgive us and perchance they may change. Allah says he forgave those who were rectifiers, and he basically avenged those who committed oppression. And then he was silent about those who did not, who basically spoke out against their rectification, their words. And the scholars, they said about this, there's one of two answers. Either God also forgave them because they didn't commit wrong, or number two, he didn't because they basically spoke out against those who wanted social rectification. So these components are part of Islam, man. All of us are trying to aspire for, the ideals in all of these three components. People need to see, and I think this is something that you'll agree with me as well, man. All of us go through different levels of developmental, I guess you could say, states with our faith as we grow older. But one thing that I've seen, especially among young men, is, they'll start to realize the importance of spirituality when they get married, especially when they start to have kids. And that element, which is just put on the back burner, and the talks about theology and what I call aqidah wars and fiqh wars and all this stuff.
You just want your kids to pray without you reminding them.
Right.
That like,
right.
If you do that, it's just like, cool. I can check the box of being a successful parent.
Exactly. And that's, by the way, the funny thing is, that's exactly what Ibrahim alayhi salam made dua for. ربنا إني أسكنت من ذريتي في واد غير ذي زرع عند بيتك المحرم ربنا ليقيموا الصلاة. Oh Allah, I left my family here in this blessed valley, which has no vegetation, meaning Mecca. Oh Allah, for them to just establish prayer. Literally. So you and Ibrahim are on the same level. But the point being is, like, okay, everybody has to look at what their reality is. Everybody has to have a moment of truth and saying, look, what am I lacking in when it comes to my spiritual state? And how much of it is based on these complexes of authenticity and, you know, representation? Dude, forget that. All of that is great, wonderful, amazing. But where are you with Allah when it comes to salah? How much of it is actually meaningful, you know?
I'll say, and just to add one more, you know, authenticity and all that, but I think there's also an element for some people of just being content. Like, hey, I'm happy with where my spirituality is, and they don't feel a need to improve it.
100%. I mean, this is, it's something that we just have to be real with ourselves that we need to work on. And it's a constant thing. It's not just, oh, I've done a course on spirituality, I've read this book on the diseases of the heart or spiritual purification of the heart, etc. But spirituality is a practice. Spirituality is, where is that meaningful? When literally, when you're just by yourself, are you doing do you find contentment in the fact that you're making dua? You find contentment in your sujood, and that translates to 2 and 3. That's with let's say it's just me and God. Okay, if it's just you and God, then why are you not having a meaningful relationship with Him? Number 2, with your family. One of the biggest problems we have, man, is just a false sense of religiosity when it comes to people who consider themselves practicing. They go to the masjid and everybody loves them, and then when they go to their house, they're like Fir'aun. And they don't realize the Prophet ﷺ emphasized the greatest thing in Islam is how you deal with others. Perfection of character. He's emphasized it to such an extent. He said this is the weightiest thing on the scale of good deeds. He didn't even mention going praying in the first line, defending the lands of the Muslims, giving charity $3 million to whatever Islamic charity program or whatever, and feeding orphans and saving people from all of these different catastrophes, which are amazing. He said the best thing is to treat people with the best of character. And Allah says in the Quran, "Al-aqrabuna awla bil ma'ruf." Those of you who are closest to you are the most deserving of your good. I mean, there's so much that can be said, but one of the things I have a huge problem with, man, is that people will be, they'll if you give them a hardcore lecture to make them cry about their salah, they'll be the front line. Cry, you know, about the charity, they'll give charity. But if you tell them to just fix how you talk to your mom, fix how you talk to your husband,
they don't want to hear it.
Your wife, your children, how you deal with people. Stop being selfish. Stop feeling entitled. Stop having assumptions of others. Speak to people with some sense of dignity. Don't feel like that, you know, these kind of things, which are very real. The Prophet ﷺ has a hadith about these things. He talks about people who feel like they have a sense of entitlement of opinion. He called them what? Thartharun, those who literally just talk in order to talk. I mean, all of this in spirituality, which is, by the way, fiqh of social media, it's in your book anyway. So all of these things, when you see that we're lacking in implementing that, you'll see that your faith will start actually to stagnate. It becomes a very ritualistic, superficial component, because the reality of Islam is practiced and it's shown in how you're interacting with people. That's when your Islam actually shines, when you become a person of your integrity, when you become a person of how you treat people. And then lastly, of course, the family component is the most important, but then the society, and being the best neighbor and being also proactive in the community. How many Muslims are like, you know, I don't care about how people vote and stuff like, I mean, dude, this is not, those words shouldn't come from a Muslim. You should actually have a sense of concern. Even if you feel like there's not going to do something, you always remember the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that if the day of judgment is about to land on your head, and you had in your hand a sapling, meaning for those of you who don't understand sapling, all right, it's a tree, it's a small tree that you're going to grow, and you wanted to basically, plant it, and the day of judgment is about to land on you, the Prophet ﷺ said, plant the tree. This is how Islam teaches us. So you're like, oh, this is all like these Debbie Downers, right? And Allah speaks about them in Surah Al-Baqarah. Those who stood in front of the army of Talut and David and Goliath. David was a soldier, right? And basically, a portion of the army, they're like, they're greater than us. They're more. They're the Debbie Downers. You know what David did to them? In essence, he was one of the soldiers, but Talut, the major, he took them out. He says, "You're not part of this army. You go do your negativity." So
I've never thought about that way.
So this is actually, by the way, it's in fiqh books. It's in books of fiqh that if you come to like the front line and a person has that kind of mentality, they're supposed to be taken out. Like you're not allowed to participate. Sorry, you can't defend. Go do something else. Go be in the kitchen. So we have a huge portion of the Muslim ummah, which is extremely toxically negative, man. Dude, like, for the love of God, bring some positivity to this ummah. Give people hope.
I think it's kind of crazy is, we talked about transactional faith and things like that earlier, but I think one of the reasons of this toxicity is that, and again, it's taking on elements of the culture, but it's
Right.
being so outcome oriented.
Exactly.
It's and not only outcome, but now with tech, it's scalability. So not
Right.
only do we have to have the right outcome, we have to have the right outcome for millions of people. And if we
Right.
can't, then it's not worth doing it. Whereas the
Mhm.
hadith about the sapling is essentially saying, forget the outcome, your process on a day-to-day basis has to be correct.
That's beautiful. Exactly. I mean, I think if we figure that out as Muslims, collectively we undermine the fact that Allah gives victory to those who are in a state of weakness because of their dua. This is the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that aren't you only given victory because of the dua of the weak amongst you. So these concepts require, number one, education, knowledge.
Yeah.
Like for some of you, honestly, who are listening to this and like, man, I've never heard some of these things in my life. I want you to genuinely ask yourself why. There are so many people, and I'm in the business of education, right? Who literally feel entitled to the fact that this has to be dropped to them by Jibreel alayhi salam. And I'm saying that honestly, like,
Yeah.
dude, you have to go and seek knowledge, go and learn, give some time. You have your Netflix series, you're watching whatever you are, give an hour, 2 hours in the week to learn, to grow, to be able to spiritually. And then when you come to the state of like, why is my spirituality this way? The first thing Islam tells us to is to seek knowledge, and seek relevant people, right? And what I mean by that also, for those of you who are like, okay, mashallah, we're going to go on YouTube. No, YouTube is not going to necessarily help you. You need to have teachers. You need to go to places where you seek wholesome knowledge. Don't sit there and listen to 5-minute sound bites. And everybody, by the way, is like that. Sheikh Hasib, can you put out like these 5-minute sound? I'm like, no.
Oh, I hate that.
We're,
That's one of
Islam
my
is not
biggest
in
pet
sound
peeves.
bites, man. You know what I mean? So, and I think, look, you know this. Alhamdulillah, you have teachers, and people who are constantly engaged, they will find growth. This is
Yeah.
an investment. This is in any like we were talking about investment the other day, right? And every single person says the same thing. If you're constantly in the game of like trying to make a quick buck, they say eventually you'll lose.
Yeah.
If you keep doing it, you might make it in the quick run and you go, okay, fine, that's great, awesome. But value investment is where you will find growth, even if there's a period of stagnation. And I tested this with a number of companies, like for example, like Tesla. Tesla had 2 years where they were stagnant, literally at the same price, going up and down, until they finally hit, and I believe it's 2016 or something like that. And now they're like quadrupled their portfolio, their investment asset. That's how faith works as well.
I
You
have
just
to
have
add
to
a
go at it. Yeah.
quick legal disclaimer that this does not constitute
This
financial
is not
advice.
financial advice.
Please
That's right.
consult a financial advisor if you
Right.
have investment questions.
100%. We're all gonna get sued. I'm just kidding. SEC is gonna come after us anyway. So for me, man, like honestly, there's a lack of genuinely seeking, which I would say spiritual education. I definitely see it. There's so many opportunities now. I mean, it's just crazy how many opportunities there are for genuinely connecting to educational outlets that will help you and give you the opportunity to just at least be educated in the sense of finding that worldview, that lived experience. Learning about the seed of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ should be like bread and butter to every Muslim. Learning about the prayer, learning about how to spiritually develop, but also as well connecting with the community of Muslims who are also doing though.
Inshallah. All right, Jazakallah khair. Anything that you're working on, any projects that you want to share with the audience?
Jazakallah khair, man. I mean, we have an outlet platform for people who want to learn from anything to basic fiqh to advanced, Quran study. It's called the Legacy Institute. We're doing a seminar at the end of February that will be also on demand for those who can't make it. It's on spiritual medicine, the roots of all spiritual diseases, talking about them and how everything else stems from these spiritual diseases if we basically diagnose them and fix them, inshallah. Other than that, just ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless you for the work that you're doing. For everybody to get Fiqh of Social Media, it's a beautiful book and mashallah, very relevant to people's lives, and everything we've discussed is basically just a microcosm of what's in that book. And also With the Heart and Mind by Mikhail Smith on prophetic emotional intelligence. Also, I think it's just a masterful book on some of the concepts we've discussed today. Allah.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you'd like to support the podcast, please subscribe in Apple Podcasts or Google Play or whatever podcast player you use. And please rate and review the podcast. As always, if you share it with a friend, that's much appreciated. You can check the show notes for all the details and links. See you in the next episode.